Slither, written by PappyStrangeLife. Sometimes a monster is your only friend. I found it endlessly annoying how they kept trying to personify addiction as a monster. The rehabs, the halfway houses, AA, NA. Everyone in recovery desperately trying to frame pain as anything more than it was. Addiction rips up your soul, it feasts on your flesh, drains your life force, and infects the world around you. I found that wildly unfair to monsters. Sometimes monsters protect you. It was 2006 and I loathed Florida. I was stuck in a grimy, rundown halfway house in a neighborhood in the Sunshine State. The shit-stained state, my roommate Devin, who rarely spoke, called it. I was far from home, and I had been in 3 consecutive rehabs. Now I was stuck in this hellhole run by a drugged-out con man because it was cheap, and I had nowhere else to turn, so far from home and a year clean. 4 of us lived in the rundown shack in a cul-de-sac abutting a train track. The litter and graffiti were only offset by the majesty of the track not 10 feet from us, surrounded by a small, decrepit forest. I didn't think much of it at the time. Why are the trees dying? It was nothing but rain and sunshine, rain and sunshine, rain and sunshine. I wasn't concerned with minutiae, or really anything outside of my own predicament. Every thought was consumed with figuring out how to get home. Maybe I should have been concerned. Devin and I got along well enough, but Chucky and Bobby, they hated me. They were 2 Boston meatheads recently paroled after a 10-year bid for cocaine trafficking. Aggressive psychopaths who worked as bellhops by day and shot steroids into each other's asses by night. They were pure ID. It's not like anyone drug tested us or bothered to check in on us. They just took what little money we had. It was my mouth they hated from the get-go. I ran it recklessly. Chucky and Bobby could hardly stand the sight of me. The days progressively turned sour, the air feeling a little more electric with the tensions of implied threats and cold glares, which invariably warped into castigations and outright violence. I remember the first time I saw it. I was absolutely convinced that my housemates had slipped me some kind of hallucinogen, that I had to be tripping balls. I didn't want to be near Chucky or Bobby, so I was walking on the train track, trying to avoid the used needles and loose nails, when I saw Slither for the first time. Slither. The name came to me instantly, like it had been buried within the recesses of a morbid place in my mind that I wasn't supposed to find. It wasn't creative. Terror doesn't inspire creativity. Fear hands the reins over to your animal brain, and the animal brain calls it like it sees it. Slither looked like Salvador Dali had done an absurd amount of LSD and tried to paint a ghostly worm. About 7 feet long, its entire form was bulbous, pulsating, and hairless. A sheer luminous white, like a fresh coat of paint on the wall of a mental ward, covered its body. 2 tiny, beady black eyes protruded from the front, at least a foot separating them. Slither didn't have a mouth, at least not one that I could see. 4 legs darted up and down from random points on its torso, angled like a grasshopper's. I honestly don't know what they were for. I mean, it didn't walk. It slithered on its belly like a snake, only at far wider and more dramatic angles. I was reminded of how a sidewinder moves, somehow simultaneously rhythmic yet with extreme left and right jerky motions. Slither was impossibly fast. It had to weigh hundreds of pounds, yet it wiggled like a weightless grubworm flying across the driveway for the safety of the grass. I stood there, frozen. My brain could not seem to process the speed and silence of its approach. How was gravel not flying anywhere? How was it making no noise? And why did its tiny eyes look so desperate? It felt like God had pushed the remote button on the world while he went to grab some popcorn to really enjoy this creature feature. God. I grew up in the church. I never cared much for religion, and I had trouble swallowing most of the concepts. But I prayed privately. Despite my doubts, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than what was in front of the curtain. I figured that I was wrong, but it helped me to get through the darkness. Getting clean, I found myself praying more and more. No atheist in a foxhole, just I needed to feel like someone was there in my corner, having my back. My friends and family had disappeared. Intellectual honesty be damned. And I don't mind admitting my brain flashed some jumbled prayer before I bolted. I cut through the woods, shredding my arms on random thorny protrusions. I could feel Slither just behind my footfalls, a strange warmth pulsating out of it. I couldn't help it. I had to look back. When I emerged from the woods onto our street, I turned around. Peering through the tree line, I could see Slither had never entered the woods. It had stopped where the tracks met the patch of dying forest. I could just make out its dark little eyes. I expected to see hunger in them, anger, animalism. I couldn't tell you how, but they almost looked desperate, pleading to me. I saw one of our neighbors on his stoop, Chicken Joe. He never introduced himself as Joe, always Chicken Joe. If you asked him about it, he'd just ball up a fist and take one step forward and menacingly tell you, "No to worry about it." A strange lot for strange times. The gear on his dirty patio table told me that he was riding the dragon and feeling comfortably numb. A dirty needle, some cotton, and a rubber tube. I didn't care. I dragged him up, muttering some incoherent complaint in his stupor. "Chicken, chicken!" I slapped him hard. A small shimmer of lucidity spread across his patchy face. "Do you see it?" I asked. I pointed through the trees at Slither, resting on the train tracks, its swollen body heaving up and down. "See what, Pappy?" Chicken asked. "The giant effing white devil worm, Chicken." He looked at me with pity and said, "Man, you need to cut back on them drugs." I rolled my eyes and slunk back to my house, looking over my shoulder the entire time. I worked late the next day, and Bobby was in a roid rage when I returned home, screaming about me leaving a plate out too long, Devin freaking him out with his silence, someone stealing his protein bars, anything his addled mind could hold on to. That was my cue, exit stage left, pursued by a hulking junkie. I crept through the woods silently, taking care not to add to the myriad of scratches running up and down my bare arms. The Florida sun drenched my face, the air so thick with humidity that you could slice it up and spread it on bread. I had to know. I did my best to tiptoe to the train tracks. With each crunch of the gravel under my feet, I winced, expecting some pale hell worm to come ripping towards me at a breakneck speed. Nothing. I stood there silently, noticing the trees seemed to die a little overnight, each branch sagging and browning. It had rained last night, but this patchwork of forest looked starved. The explosion of motion in my periphery set off alarm bells in a primal place, like a prehistoric hunter sensing predatory eyes in the deep dark. I was entranced for a moment by just how pronounced its slither was. Its tail end whipped so far left and right that you would expect its bones, if it had any, just to snap. That dance would continue up its body, a mesmerizing flailing motion. The horrible wriggle of a demon earthworm. This time I was off the block a lot quicker, plunging through the forest, feeling thorns mutilate my skin. I stopped at the edge of the cul-de-sac, hands on my knees, panting, staring through the trees. Slither sat, its body heaving at the edge of the woods, just on the tracks. Its eyes bore holes into me. This time, I felt like they were begging me. At first, I thought that it was hungry, and I was just a meal that just kept tempting it. But there was something else there. Like a toddler who needed to relay an emergency. All the franticness of emotion, but none of the necessary language. "What the F are you doing?" Take stupidity, add redundancy, which meant that Chucky was right behind me. "Looking at this effed up monster on the track," I said, pointing to where Slither rested. "You're one stupid little crackhead. There ain't shit out there. Give me $20, Chucky said. I looked at Chucky, twice my size, eyes and arms bulging like a Batman villain. "F you," I said. Chucky slammed me in the stomach. I doubled over, vomiting what little food I'd been able to afford to eat that day. "Your days are numbered, you and that effing mouth." And with that, Chucky walked off. The days ran away, and I settled into a disturbing routine. I found work and food when I could, but most days I crept to the tracks, trying to keep silent, hoping to watch Slither, only to find myself the victim in hot pursuit until I cleared the tracks. Each day, the abuse got worse. I would catch a beating for leaving my laundry in the dryer. They'd punch holes in the drywall because I left some hairs on the bathroom sink. Every retort I couldn't help resulted in a bloody lip or a bloody nose. Day by day, the small forest took on a darker hue, its collective life decaying, heading to rot. The neighborhood took to calling me schizo. Every person I showed couldn't see Slither, who would rest at the edge of the forest watching me, trying to tell me something with its eyes in a language that I just didn't understand. I prayed to a god that I didn't believe in, who wasn't listening to get me out of here, away from the monsters. A bottle of soda was my undoing. I grabbed one out of the fridge late one night, not realizing that it was pressurized. When I opened it, a torrential storm of dark brown liquid exploded, covering our ramshackle living room. Nicotine-stained walls, hanging cupboards, broken tile, they were all soaked. I was contemplating my fate when Bobby and Chucky walked in. My heart iced over as I realized their work shirts were sitting on a few chairs nearby. They were now covered in brown stains. I could barely decipher their gorilla screams. No sense of appealing to compassion or offering to remedy the situation. When the body says run, I had learned you run. So I ran. Through the trees, too resigned and devoid of life to even tear at my arms. I was much smaller and faster, and I thought that gave me an edge. But I was wrong. You can't outrun the hatred of a bull. You can't outrun the madness of steroids. Just as I hit the track, they caught up with me. They took turns viciously beating me. The first few strikes hurt like hell. After that, shock set in and my body went limp. I realized that we had long passed the usual abuse and that this was likely my final curtain call. As my swollen eyes lost their field of vision, I could see my blood spraying from my nose. I could taste the copper of it in my mouth and hear my bones crunching. I don't know how long it went on. I don't know how I wasn't already dead when my body crumpled onto the tracks. I saw them, just barely, standing over me, the embers of unaltered rage burning in their eyes. Gleeful smiles etched on their faces. Two monsters delighting in their wicked work. From some distant corner of my mind, I called out to God one last time. All I wanted to do was get clean and go home. Even if I deserved this, mercy, please, mercy. Send me an angel. It felt stupid and out of character, but at the edge of death, you lose all sense of self and go for broke. The last thing I saw before the infinite warmth of unconsciousness took me was Slither, the pale worm effortlessly gliding towards me. Its meal, the feast finally ready. I came to in the hospital 3 days later. I had more injuries than I could count. Concussions, broken this, shattered that. They had caught the internal bleeding just in time. The police took my statement. Apparently, Chicken Joe saw Bobby and Chucky chasing me. He found me and got me help. Sometimes even us junkies do the right thing. A detective asked me if I knew what happened to Bobby and Chucky after they beat me. I could only speak in painful rasp and told her that they must have made a run for it, that they didn't want to go back to prison and all of that. The detective's eyes shifted uncomfortably and she showed me a picture. Next to the pool of blood my body had lain in was a sight that I'll never forget. 2 pairs of boots perfectly upright, not a drop of blood on them. Which was strange, given that a leg jutted out from each boot, cleanly severed just below the knee. I was at a loss for words. I was ruled out, given that I was an inch from death when they found me. Our neighbors confirmed to the police that Chicken Joe never entered the woods. They never did figure out what had happened to Chucky and Bobby, but I did. It took a few months of healing to get back there, but the moment I could, I returned to the cul-de-sac. The decrepit forest was bursting with green life, as if the magic of spring had found it again in one fell swoop. I carefully cut through the trees and found the tracks and stood there and waited. Slither came tearing down the track with its haunting wriggle, hurtling towards me. I never moved. No more running. 1 foot away, our eyes met. I can't really explain how, but I saw love there. I was startled when I heard the whispers. They were faint and sprang from every tree. 1,000 voices, all the same, melodic but discordant, far away. "Hello, Pappy." My hands trembled, but I steeled my nerves. "Hello, did you eat them? Bobby and Chucky?" Slither cocked its head slightly. "I did not know monsters had names. But yes, I ate them. I ate them for what they did to you, my child." The compassion in the thousands of voices was palpable. "Thank you," I muttered quietly, gratefully looking into its eyes, crying a little. You're here to protect me, aren't you? I'm sorry that I ran away." "Yes, he does not always send pretty angels. Sometimes he sends me." I walked over and gently touched its head, holding my hand steady, feeling the warmth of my guardian. "I can never thank you enough. What's your name?" You call me Slither. I like that, Slither. They're still slithering inside me right now, you know, for what they did to you, my child." My eyes grew to saucers as Slither raised its face level with mine. Where nothing once was, a small mouth appeared and grew. Its maw opened, showing what had to be at least 10,000 rows of teeth, swelling and expanding until I could see deep into Slither's body. That's when I saw them, Chucky and Bobby, fumbling, twitching, scrambling, reaching from inside Slither's bulbous belly. They screamed and begged and pleaded for help, cried out to me, cried out to God and their mothers. None of us were listening. Slither closed its mouth until nothing was left on its face but its obsidian eyes and silence. We stood there among the lush trees, and I felt life in my body again. "I'm going back to Texas, Slither. Will you come with me?" I asked. Slither cocked its head, and I could sense a smile that wasn't there. "Of course, Pappy. Just make sure to live by a train track."